Welcome back to the Pro Wrestling Push Me poll for April 1990, wrestling's only objective, weighted, data-driven ranking system based on which pro wrestlers were getting the biggest push in terms of big matches wrestled and titles held. This was a big month for wrestling, the biggest of the year, with two of the three biggest wrestling cards of the year taking place. WrestleMania 6 at the Toronto Sky Dome at the start of the month, and then the crazy US-Japan Wrestling Summit show co-promoted by All Japan, the WWF and New Japan at the Tokyo Dome a couple of weeks later. April's top 10 is entirely dominated by WWF wrestlers who appeared on both of those big shows. And on top of all that, WWF also staged the 26th Saturday Night's Main Event TV special at the end of the month. So it was a busy month for the Fed, to say the least. Let's get to it. First things first, the Ultimate Warrior shocked the world by defeating Hulk Hogan clean in the main event of WrestleMania 6 to win the WWF World title for the first time. This was a huge passing of the torch moment for the company. Hogan had been on top virtually non-stop for the last 6 years as the 80s wrestling boom exploded and was about to take a few months off, I believe primarily for the birth of his son and just general fatigue. Warrior was the number 2 guy in the company, and it made sense to strap the rocket to him, and Hogan, for all his flaws, put Warrior over huge here at Mania. That big main event is also my match of the month for April, and was Pro Wrestling Illustrated's match of the year for the whole of 1990. Wrestling's about spectacle, emotion, and crowd connection just as much, if not more, than it is work rate and pure realism. And for me, Hogan vs. Warrior is right up there with the best of it. It was just simple storytelling done really, really well. Historically significant, the top 2 stars of the company, a split crowd reaction, and a really well constructed wrestling match that didn't try to do too much but wrung every drop of emotion out of what it did do. As both match and spectacle, it had been built to perfection, the company's 2 top babyfaces going at it title for title. The crowd was at fever pitch from the start, and it's just a perfectly put together match, slow and deliberate, but yeah, every little thing had meaning, and both men played their parts brilliantly. No one could get an early advantage, from shoves to knuckle locks. Eventually they take each other down with a double clothesline. Warrior locks in a bear hug, Hogan punches out, and the ref takes a bump. There's no one to count the pin as Hogan spikes Warrior, and Warrior suplexes Hogan. Warrior goes for the gorilla press and big splash finish, but Hogan kicks out at 2 and hulks up. Big boot, leg drop, but Warrior rolls out of the way and hits his splash and gets the pin to become new WWF champion and kick off a new era of the biggest wrestling company on the planet. Okay, when all was said and done, the new Warrior era didn't go brilliantly, as it turns out, and we'll get to all of that in coming months. But for now, this was an incredible, historic moment in front of a massive crowd, and unquestionably the biggest wrestling moment of the year. Warrior and Hogan are numbers 1 and 2 in this month's top 10, by a country mile. Number 3 in points this month might come as a bit of a surprise. Warrior's first televised title defense in the US came against the Heenan family's resident Polynesian powerhouse Haku on Saturday Night's Main Event at the end of April. Haku began the month as one of the WWF Tag Team Champions alongside Andre the Giant as the Colossal Connection. They lost those belts to Demolition on the undercard of WrestleMania. Demolition comes in at number 5, Axe and Smash becoming the first ever 3-time WWF Tag Champions. And the end of that match came when Haku accidentally kicked Andre in the face, leading to the Colossal Connection disintegrating and Andre turning face again by beating up Haku and Bobby Heenan to big cheers from the crowd. So Haku was back in singles ranks and was, in all honesty, a slightly underwhelming choice for Warrior's first title defense on US TV. Warrior won that SNME match relatively easily, but to close the show, Bobby Heenan said he'd spotted weaknesses in Warrior's game and began preparing another Heenan family member, Rick Rude, the only man to have ever beat Warrior, for a future world title challenge which would unfold over the coming months. So Haku ended up being a decent transition match for Warrior and at least got his title run rolling. Elsewhere in the absolutely stacked WrestleMania 6 card, Million Dollar Man Ted DiBiase, ranked number 4 for April, actually beat Jake the Snake Roberts, albeit by countout, to regain possession of the $1 million title belt and end that program with the heel victorious, which was relatively rare back in those days. And while Haku was Warrior's first US televised title defense, DiBiase actually got the first internationally televised shot at Warrior's belt in a weird match where Warrior was ignored and DiBiase cheered, which takes us neatly to the craziness that was the US-Japan Wrestling Summit at the Tokyo Dome, and there's a fascinating history to this, so let's get into it. This show has become like this great lost mythical supercard, which is only available to find in sections scattered on the internet, nowhere as a full complete show. We talked in the February PMP about New Japan and All Japan working with each other for the first time in over a decade to co-promote the big super fight in Tokyo Dome show. While this was happening, Vince McMahon had also made overtures towards working with All Japan to run its own co-promoted Tokyo Dome show in Japan and get in on the Japanese wrestling boom. And this was a change because historically the WWF had had more ties with New Japan, with All Japan more closely associated with the NWA. But with AJPW now distancing itself from the NWA and forging a closer working relationship with New Japan, there was suddenly a chance to do a proper Forbidden Door style supercard co-promoted by all three companies. But what sounded amazing in theory quickly developed into a really difficult working relationship around making it a reality, as Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba's historically fractious relationship as the heads of the two Japanese rival companies quickly reared its head and all sorts of problems emerged, and the final product effectively ended up being just a WWF All Japan card with cross-promotional matches and just 2 New Japan matches on the undercard, where NJPW wrestlers only fought each other, not any wrestlers from the other two brands. There's a bizarro world photo out there somewhere of Vince McMahon running the Tokyo Dome show at Gorilla, sending Jushin Liger out for his match, which I'll have to find and tag into this. Vince essentially seems to have ended up running the show. And while it was the third biggest drawing show of the year globally, it also turned out to be a bit of a disappointment and not as big a draw as Vince had been hoping. Both the UWF and New Japan All Japan Super Fight had drawn in excess of 60,000 fans to the Dome over the last few months, but the WWF All Japan Wrestling Summit only drew 53,000. Still a huge crowd, but nowhere near as big. There were all sorts of creative and booking issues going on around the card as well. The originally advertised main event of WWF World Champion Hulk Hogan versus Terry Gordy got pulled and cancelled relatively late in the day, because Hogan obviously lost the WWF title to Warrior at WrestleMania 6, something Vince had not given either Baba or Inoki a heads up would be happening. So suddenly the big draw for the Dome show, Hogan, was not even champion anymore, and the new champion, Warrior, was a complete unknown quantity in Japan, having never paid his dues or done a tour there. So Giant Baba was pissed off about this, and then Terry Gordy got cold feet. Gordy was on the cusp of getting a major push in All Japan, and jobbing out to Hogan in front of a huge crowd that wasn't even now a title match suddenly seemed less appealing to what he'd agreed to. So in stepped company man and All Japan veteran Stan Hansen to save the day. He'd take a loss to Hogan in the main event, and he did so, but he gave him a hell of a hard-hitting match first that ended up being one of the better matches of Hogan's career. Which is typical. You wait a full year for a good Hogan match, then two show up within a fortnight of each other. Anyway, Hogan and Hansen had a really strong match in which they both got bloodied, and Hogan won with the Axe Bomber Lariat, which was his traditional finisher from his own time back in Japan. So, looping back on the undercard of the Tokyo Dome show, Warrior beat DiBiase in a match the Japanese fans basically shat on, ignoring Warrior and cheering on DiBiase, who was well known and respected from previous tours there. In the semi-main, Giant Baba teamed with Andre the Giant, both barely mobile but absolutely beloved in Japan still, to beat the new tag team champions Demolition in a non-title match. And All Japan's Triple Crown champion Jumbo Tsuruta teamed with the man of the month Haku, who again had started his career in Japan and was well known there, to beat the WWF team of Mr. Perfect and Rick Martel. And it was fun to see 3 former AWA World Champions in one match together. Mr. Perfect actually comes in at number 6 this month. In addition to appearing at both WrestleMania and the Wrestling Summit, he also finally had his big one-on-one blow-off match against Hulk Hogan 5 months after destroying Hogan's title belt on Saturday night's main event at the end of the month. By this point, obviously Hogan was no longer champion, and Perfect had already lost, kind of shockingly, to Brutus Beefcake at WrestleMania 6, and Hogan was already segueing into a new program against his next big bad, Earthquake. In the end, Hogan kicked out of the Perfectplex and scored a clean win, and with that, Perfect's main event run was essentially over. Earthquake himself was number 7 this month, taking out a host of mid-carders like Hillbilly Jim, Hercules and Hacksaw Jim Duggan with the Earthquake splash, and claiming his attack on Hogan last month is why Hogan lost the title to Warrior in the first place. Hogan and Earthquake were gearing up for a big angle that would put the Hulkster on the shelf for a few months and give him that well-deserved time off, but that wouldn't come until next month. For now, Earthquake was still being built up as an absolute monster heel who had Hogan in his sights. Andre the Giant at number 8 we've talked about, losing the WWF tag belts, turning face and teaming up with Baba at the Tokyo Dome. Rick Martel at number 9 in the scoring's a bit of a surprise, to be honest. He opened Mania with a win over Koko Beware, worked that high-profile tag team match against Tsuruta at the Tokyo Dome, and was all over Saturday night's main event with a series of commercials for his new Arrogance cologne. Martel had been the model Rick Martel, for months now, but it was around about this time he really ramped up the character and started leaning into it hard with the Atomizer, and he did it really, really well. And finally, at number 10 this month is Randy Savage, who was in the midst of a feud against the common man Dusty Rhodes, which included a fun mixed tag match at Mania with Savage and Sherry versus Dusty and Sapphire, with Miss Elizabeth in their corner. Savage also had a blisteringly good match against All Japan's Genichiro Tenryu at the Tokyo Dome Summit, which is well worth your time trying to watch, and again, I'll post links to those in the description. Bubbling under the top 10, for the WWF, you had all the other undercard wrestlers who appeared on the Mania card scoring well. So Rick Rude beat Superfly Jimmy Snuka, the Big Boss Man beat Akeem, Hacksaw Duggan beat Dino Bravo, the Orient Express beat the Rockers, the Barbarian beat Tito Santana, the Hart Foundation beat the Bolsheviks, and Roddy Piper and Bad News Brown went to a double countout. On the undercard of the Wrestling Summit, New Japan's IWGP Tag Team Champions Masa Saito and Shinya Hashimoto beat Riki Choshu and Masa Chono, Jake the Snake beat the Big Boss Man, the Great Kabuki beat Greg Valentine, Bret Hart vs Tiger Mask was a 20-minute draw, Tito and Superfly beat Kenta Kobashi and Masafuchi, and Jushin Liger defended the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship against Akira Nagami. Outside of that show, IWGP champion Big Van Vader was tentatively returning to action towards the end of April after getting a steel plate fitted in his face to protect his eye, but wasn't booked on the Tokyo Dome show. And similarly, Kiji Muto, the Great Muta, returned to New Japan towards the end of April and teamed with Chono to win the IWGP Tag Team titles from Saito and Hashimoto. Bubbling under for All Japan, as well as Stan Hansen for his match against Hogan, we had Triple Crown champion Jumbo Tsuruta. We've talked about the cross-promotional tag match at the Dome, but Jumbo also had one last Triple Crown title defense against his longtime rival Genichiro Tenryu this month during the Champion Carnival Tour. Shockingly, Tenryu, the number 2 native star of All Japan and heir apparent to Tsuruta, had announced at the start of the Champion Carnival that he would be leaving All Japan, and his title match against Jumbo would be his final match for the company. This was huge in Japan. Tsuruta and Tenryu had 2 phenomenally good matches against each other in 1989, which are often pointed to as the beginnings of All Japan's King's Road style of physical storytelling. But honestly, this final match in their trilogy was more angle than mat classic. It started with Tenryu's former tag partner Stan Hansen attacking him before the bell and then coming back out after Tsuruta wins to set up the presumed next Triple Crown match, Jumbo versus Hansen. Nonetheless, this was a really significant moment. Tsuruta definitively winning his series against Tenryu, and Tenryu leaving the company for a mysterious new venture, which would eventually transpire to be forming his own new promotion, Super World Sports, but again, we'll get to that. Down in the NWA during April, barely getting a look in, World champion Ric Flair had been challenged to a cage match rematch by US champion Lex Luger to mitigate interference from the Horsemen Arn Anderson and Ole Anderson. That match would take place at the Capital Combat pay-per-view next month, and Luger would be backed up by his new best buddy, the injured Sting, and Robocop. Don't ask if you don't know. The NWA was honestly going off the rails a little bit at this point, and we'll get to that next month. In the USWA, heel Jerry Lawler once again dropped the USWA title to Jimmy Valiant, and once again the title change was only recognised in the Memphis branch of the USWA, not the Dallas branch. Promoter's son Jeff Jarrett was being kept strong as a face as well. And lastly, and probably leastly, in the AWA, Larry Zbyszko regained the AWA World title from Masa Saito at Superclash 4 in St. Paul, but the AWA was barely drawing fans at this point and had arguably fallen below even the USWA as the number 3 promotion in the States at this point. Right, April 1990, done and dusted. A new era in the WWF under the Ultimate Warrior had been truly ushered in. Thanks for listening. Please do like, subscribe, support this little venture, and see you next time for May and the nonsense that was Robocop in a main event angle on a Southern wrestling card. Cheers.